Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Now, today I am so lucky to be joined by somebody that's made a huge impact on my life, whether it be through the things that he's directed, written, or composed throughout his amazing career. Today I'm joined by the amazing John Harrison. How you doing today, sir?
I'm good. Thanks for that nice introduction, Ken. You make me think like I actually know a little bit about what I'm doing.
Well, I mean, honestly, everybody that knows me knows I'm a huge fan of anthology horror films. Anthology
Mhm.
horror is one of my favorite things because you could have
Me
one
too.
bad story and still an amazing film or TV series overall. So to talk to somebody that's been such a big impact on not just that, but other films that I'm a huge fan of. And I want to actually get into that a little bit because for the people that don't know you, I would like for them to get to know you here for a second. You worked as the first assistant director for Mr. George A. Romero. You've directed episodes of Tales from the Crypt, Tales from the Dark Side, the Creepshow TV series, and the Tales from the Dark Side film as well. So we were talking about anthologies and how you've directed some of the TV shows and actually Tales from the Dark Side, the movie. So is it any different for you being a director for an anthology as in comparison to a straight single film? Is there a lot of differences in that for you?
Well, yeah. I mean, in the movie, it's vastly different because you're trying to create a continuity for a 90-minute or 120-minute film that's made up of individual stories. So you have to find a way to make that 2 hours really work as a single movie. When you're directing anthology television, it's not quite the same because anthology television has multiple stories. And in the case of, say, a Tales from the Crypt or Tales from the Dark Side, it's a one-off. You do an episode and it is under the umbrella of either the Tales from the Crypt or the Tales from the Dark Side title, but
Hmm.
you're not doing multiple episodes in one thing. Now, I should modify that slightly because Creepshow, the new TV series,
Hmm.
is exactly that. We do two stories in one episode.
Right.
And so often my two stories or three stories or four, however many I'm asked to, they might air, for example, in the new series that premieres on October the 13th. So tune in. Um, I'm paired with Greg Nicotero for the premiere episode, and
Yeah.
again with Greg for the finale episode. So two of my stories we share that episode. In a movie, and George and I went through this. George obviously, in particular, found the way to tie everything together in Creepshow by he and Steve created the comic book
Yeah.
as the linking element. In Tales from the Dark Side, it was the storytelling of the little boy who was captured and kept in the cage.
Hmm.
And in uh, other anthologies, I think the most successful ones are the ones in the film area have
Hmm.
a linkage so that all the stories feel of a piece. They don't feel like, oh, just here's three stories and we're just going to
Right.
throw them together and call it a movie.
And I agree with you. When you have that wraparound
Yeah.
that goes around with the story to tie everything together, I
Yep.
agree with you because even though you're watching, sometimes 4 to 5 different sections of a film, it all ties in to be one amazing film. And like I said, even if you have one or two stories that don't hit every single beat, you can still have a fantastic film. And that's the great thing about an anthology. You can, have one story that you're not a huge fan of, and then you can still just be super amazing.
Well, that's the beauty of it because although I'd like to think that all the ones that I've been involved in, all the stories are good,
Yeah.
but the other thing about anthologies, which I love, and I've done, full movies and anthologies at the same time. The thing about an anthology is that each, particularly when you're doing them in television, it's like doing a small movie. Each one is its own self-contained story. And
Sure.
when you come back the next week, it's a different story. And so for a writer and a director, it's really like making individual movies. And I
Mhm.
love that.
And I was going to ask that because you get to use, the creative hat as a director is something that whether you're making a short film, an anthology film, a full film, it doesn't matter because you're still always going to have that creativity. But it seems like with an anthology, if you're directing, especially 3 or 4 different mini episodes, especially, it seems like you get to be a little bit more creative. Is that something that kind of drives you a little bit? Is getting to be a little more creative on the anthologies because you're doing so many different stories?
Yes, and yes and no. I mean, it's a different style of filmmaking, as we just talked about.
Mhm.
The wraparound story is crucial because you want to give all the stories a context. But what I do love about it, a way for me to go to my team and say, I want each one of these to be different. I want them
Right.
to look different. I want them to feel different. They have different stories. One's a mummy story, one's a kind of a romantic, gothic romantic story, and the other is just a balls out, creepy horror tale about a cat that
A
comes down
cat.
and kills everybody. So we talked with among ourselves constantly. Well, how are we going to make each one of these really individualized and yet still feel like they're part of the context
Hmm.
of a full movie? So creatively, it's a lot of fun because I'm basically able to create completely different looks and feels for each one of those tales.
Sure. And on top of that, being a writer director, something else that I've always respected, and people on the channel that have ever watched me knows I've said this 1,000 times. A score can make or break a film. It's really a big part of the film. The absence of score, when to put in the score, how your score goes along with the film are all very important. And you being a composer as well, I mean, you were the composer for Creepshow, Day of the Dead, Tales from the Dark Side. I mean, so many more that you did some composing on. When it comes to being a composer, how do you get in the mode, like in the mood to start composing? Do you watch the film first? Like without the score, are you there on set watching, or do you get like a pre-edit that you got to build the score around?
Outlier because I didn't start off to be a film composer. I was
Mhm.
a musician and I had a career prior to my devoting myself entirely to filmmaking where I was a working musician and I was on the road and was on tour with a guitarist named Roy Buchanan and had a great career with him, had my own band, Homebrew, and recording with them. And so by the time it came to working with George, I was known as having a musical background,
Mhm.
um, and but I had never really said, "Oh, I'm going to go and become a film composer." I
Right.
became a composer accidentally because those of you who know George's work, his early movies were all scored with what we used to call needle drops or library music because he didn't have the budgets to hire and make an original score.
Mhm.
So he would buy cues from a music library and then he would cut them, and he was a phenomenal editor. And he would cut them together to work with the picture. But when we got to Creepshow, we fast realized that the level of the quality of the cues that we were getting were really not up to the quality of the movie that he was making.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm not sure. We need something here, and I don't really have the right thing. And I was the guy with the piano. So I said, well, George, let me just noodle something. And that just started it. So I've always loved movie music, and
Yeah.
I have lots of scores on albums and so forth. I love the history of it, and not just horror music
Right.
or horror movies, but movie music in general.
Mhm.
And so it was not easy to slide into, but the process was very different from what is normally done because I was George's assistant director. And so I was on the set and working with him throughout the entire production, all the pre-production, all the production. So I knew the movie intimately by sitting next to him through the whole production. And we would talk about it. What kind of
Yeah.
music would work here? What would go there? And so by the time I got a chance to sit down and write the music, we had already pre-spotted the movie essentially and had really knew what we were going to try and do. In Day of the Dead in particular, I just moved all my, as soon as production wrapped, I moved all my gear into the editing rooms downstairs And Pat Buba, my dear friend Pat Buba, who was the editor of that movie, and George they would slide they would slide videotapes through the letter holder so I could watch it, and I would write it, and then I would bring pieces of music up to them, and we could lay it up against the picture and see what worked and what didn't work. So by the time I got into the studio, the whole movie.
That's
Um,
amazing.
yeah, most people don't get a chance to do that. They are given the picture at some point. If they're, a Hans Zimmer or a John Williams or somebody that works with directors over and over again, there's a shorthand, which is very valuable between a director and a composer. Um, but most composers get the movie as a cut,
Mhm.
and then they work to that cut.
Yeah.
I was different, and then of course when I was directing, I totally knew it, because I either had written the script and directed, or just directed, and so I knew the material intimately.
And especially, it's kind of like when you have a guitar player that's writing a guitar part. Most of the time when they're writing the guitar, they're thinking about the bass, they're thinking about the drums, they're thinking about the piano, concertos that are going along with it. And if you're directing it, you're kind of thinking of that score as you're going along, I would think. Is that something you do, like as you're cutting scenes in your head? Are you already kind of fiddling with the music in your head?
Sometimes, but I mean, you got to remember that when you're directing, a movie is written three times basically.
Yeah.
It's written when it's written when it's directed, and it's written when it's cut. And so you really don't know. I mean, you might be able to intuit some theme ideas or some feelings more than
Sure.
actual, this is what the sound is going to be. Day of the Dead is dead, but it turns out we didn't have the budget to make the movie that he had written. But while it was in being discussed, and while they were raising the money to do it, I knew that George was going to wanted me to do the music. So I was already working on themes based on what I had read on his script.
Sure.
And that script was set in Florida. It was very much uh, it was all the people were at the beach, and it had almost a Caribbean feel uh, as the end of the world with the zombies was occurring. And so I composed some themes. Then we found out, and I tempt them, with my gear, and he loved them, but we didn't have the money to do the script that he had written, so he had to condense that script into what now everybody knows as the iconic film set in the
Mhm.
caves and all like that. But he loved the music and wanted to keep the music,
Sure.
so I had to adapt it to the tone of that movie, which
Right.
worked out great.
Hmm.
Although I will tell you, Ken, when it first came out, there were a lot of people that didn't like it, really hated that score, because they said it was like it wasn't a horror movie score. It was, what is all this marimba shit and all this like Caribbean bullshit? What are we talking about
Right.
here? They're stuck in a cave and there's I mean, plenty of scares and plenty of jumps and everything else. But George loved that kind of counter programming, if you will.
Well, and
Uh,
that juxtaposition, of
exactly.
the darkness, and then you have the Caribbean style beats, the steel drums and stuff like that. So, like that's the perfect thing. And obviously, Mr. Romero knew what he was doing. You knew what you were doing because people are still talking about that today. It's gained such a huge cult following.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I'm amazed now to find out. I mean, it's people love that score. I mean, they keep releasing it on CD and LP, and so it's like, well, what did I know?
Well, and it's even more than that. Like I said, we've talked about how you're a director. We've talked about how you've written films, you've written segments for different anthologies and TV shows. We've talked about how you are a composer director, but what we haven't talked about yet is your book. So your book
Oh
is
yeah.
out now.
Hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about the book?
Well, I kind of jokingly say this is what happens when there's a pandemic and a guy has too much time on his hands. Um, I had this idea. I carried it around for a long time, and like with my previous book and with the one I just finished, a lot of uh, a lot of times my story ideas come out and I start writing them down and noodle them on paper to see where they're going. They're not really outlines or treatments or anything. Story would go. And I was doing that with this and then realized, well, I'm kind of writing it in prose. I mean, it's kind of feeling like a story.
Yeah.
So again, I had the time and I said, I'm just going to commit to it. And that was how Passing Through Veils came to be. Fortunately,
Mhm.
my agent loved it. And I had a very good relationship with uh, Kevin Anderson, who owns Wordfire Press. Kevin is a great author in his own right. He and I worked together on Frank Herbert's Dune when I was directing those miniseries.
Yeah.
And I sent it to Kevin, and he loved it. He had written a really nice blurb for a previous book of mine, and he said, I'd love to publish this. So I said, Kevin, you got it, man. And it just came out on August the 15th. You can get it on wordfire.com, Wordfire, all one word. Excuse the shameless self-promotion here. Wordfirepress.com or Amazon or Barnes and Noble or whatever.
Well, the good thing is you're not going to be the only one that plugs it, because not only did John just plug it, but I'm going to as well, because I have all the links to his book down in the description of this video. So make
Oh,
sure that you're
great.
checking
Thank
out
you.
these links. Make sure that you are getting yourself a copy of this book. And I also have John's social media links. So make sure that you're following him on social media. Make sure you check out the website so that way you can stay up to date with him and all the things he's doing. And like you said, new season of Creepshow is right around the corner. So make sure you guys are checking out the brand new season. We know he's got the first episode and the finale mixed with Greg Nicotero. So those are two names you might have heard of once or twice in the horror world. So, and you have all these amazing things. And to be honest with you, like, it's not lip service. When my good buddy Gory Bits told me that you were willing to come on and do this, I hit the roof, because scores are something that's very important to me. Anthologies are something that are very important to me. The work you've done with Mr. Romero is very important to me. So to bring you on and talk to you about your new book, to talk to you about some of the amazing things you've done, this means a lot to me, because horror started in my life because of you guys. And so that's why I kind of want to go back to the past here for a second, John, and talk about what got you started in the horror genre, your first horror movie. And John, the first horror movie that you watched was.
Well, that's kind of hard to answer because when we were little, um, we uh, we weren't able to go to a lot of movies. I mean, I guess that's not quite true because I lived up the street from a movie theater, and back in the day, my parents, it was a time when they could say, "Get out of the house," and we would just go to the movies. Um, and there wasn't the rating systems. But the way I was really introduced to it as a little kid was through a show in Pittsburgh called Chiller Theater. It was
Okay.
hosted by a wonderful guy. I put him in my movies, and he just was a really terrific guy. His name was Bill Cardell. Watch these movies on late night TV. Um, I do remember taking my brother as a little kid, and we went to see The Blob with Steve McQueen.
Nice.
He was so scared he had to walk out. I, of course, sat through the whole thing and loved it. There were movies like The Tingler and The Blob, but the one that really I sat up and I said, "Oh, this is filmmaking. This is really," was Robert Wise's The Haunting, the
Okay.
original Haunting, based on Shirley Jackson's novel. And if you guys haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's in black and white. It was made in 1960, I believe, and it is a slow burn.
Mhm.
There are no monsters. There are no gruesome killings. But it is one of the most suspenseful and tense movies I've ever sat through. And so it's kind of a paradigm for me. And then, of course, once I started getting into it, then I went back and I looked at a lot of other stuff. And I have the whole collection of Val Lewton movies. Um, and just take it from there. And then you get into the modern era and you get to something like The Exorcist, which changed the game. And of course, George. So I love the genre and all.
Mhm.
love movies in general and go, but I just love what the genre can do because it's great storytelling. It puts your emotions on the edge. If it's really well done, it's not just about the killing and the blood and this. I mean, you think that that's kind of funny coming from somebody like me who started off with George Romero, but if it's really well done, it's a genre that digs into your deepest emotional core.
Right. And that's the thing. You like you just said, I'm not against, the blood and the guts and the slashers
No.
and nothing like that. I can hold my breath for a long time. It's one of my favorite things ever. So
Yeah.
um it's just one of those like and when you get these movies, um it's really incredible sometimes because you have the opportunity, especially like with The Haunting, you go back and it's visceral.
Oh
Like
yeah.
like you said,
Oh
it's
yeah.
a slow burn, but I don't need blood and guts and gore to be scared. That's like an
No.
added bonus. That's like the sprinkles on top of my ice cream, but the ice cream has to taste good in order for me to want to put the sprinkles on it. A movie has to
Well,
have
when they
a level of fear in order for me to want to watch it anyway. And when you're talking about The Blob, The Haunting, these weren't super bloody, scary, gory movies like that. They were just
no,
viscerally getting into under your skin, scary type of movies.
because they relied on story.
Exactly. And The Haunting is one of those movies that they did do a remake
They relied
recently.
on story.
Hmm.
And I mean, once they got to the point where the two girls are in bed at night and the pounding starts happening and it's coming down and you don't see anything. You don't see any
Right.
monsters. And Wise did a fabulous job. Like he'd do Dutch angles and move in on a piece of the wall, but then the piece of the wall looked like a face, but it wasn't a face. It was just a piece of the wall. But it scared the living crap out of me.
Right.
Um, so I don't know. That to me, I said to myself, if a filmmaker can do that to me, and George, it was the same with George when I saw
Hmm.
Night of the Living Dead when I was in college, and I just went to see it because it was made in Pittsburgh, so I got to see what this guy's up to.
Yeah.
I said, any filmmaker that can do that, then I want to know how to do that. I want to know that guy. I want to know how to work on an audience like that.
Sure. And when we're talking about The Haunting, like I said, they did do a remake, and I believe it was Liam Neeson and Catherine Zeta-Jones that were in the remake
It
of the
was,
film.
and it was directed by oh, I forget his name. He was Jan de Bont,
Yeah.
and he started off as a cinematographer. Listen, it was very well done. It had a really big budget, but it really relied on special effect.
Right.
The Haunting, if you've ever read the book, it's a psychological haunting. It's a psychological thriller. Shirley Jackson, Saint Shirley, as we call her, is it's all about the mind and everything that was going on. And Robert Wise's movie captured that perfectly. The second one was really about special effects.
It came out at a time when 13 Ghosts was coming out and all these other remakes of the
CG
classic.
was so big
Right.
then. Mhm.
Right. And again, I'm not going to poo poo on it either because I agree with you. I think it was a well made film, but it doesn't capture that visceral anxiety that the
Right,
original Haunting
right.
gave you. What's going to
Exactly.
happen next? I'm
Exactly.
not scared of the jump scares. I'm scared of what's going to happen. I'm scared for these people. I'm scared of what is happening in this place. So, do you remember from The Haunting which scene it was as a young boy that affected you the most?
Well, the pounding scene definitely did. There was another scene where where Eleanor is in her bedroom by herself, and she's talking to herself, but she can hear um, voices um, in the walls. She doesn't know where they're coming from, but they are, and so you don't know whether she's going insane that he had locked up upstairs, and that kind of thing. So there are just so many. Oh, then there was another scene where they're all sitting around in the living room, and this is so subtle. but it just had such an effect on me. They're sitting there and they're waiting for something paranormal to happen, and nothing's really happening. And then all of a sudden, Wise has a shot, and they're sitting there, and the piano is here, and the harp in the room is there, and all of a sudden the harp just goes ring, as if something went by and brushed the strings. And everybody, of course, looks up. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just this tiny little subtle moment, but it's almost a jump scare in and of itself. Because you're just going, whoa, whoa, what did that? What? I'm looking behind me, you know?
Exactly. And especially when you get these type of haunting movies. I've always said like supernatural horror, haunting horrors have always been my favorite because
Yeah,
I started off with House from 1986. That was my first horror movie.
sure.
And
Yeah.
so
Steve
like I
Miner,
feel
good
like
movie.
that, yeah, so, supernatural horror like that has always been, up at the top of my list. And when you have movies like The Haunting, like you said, you're always wondering what's happening, what's going on right now, who is behind this, why is it happening? And it's not like, oh, it's the guy in the hockey mask that's doing it. Oh, it's the guy in the William Shatner mask that's doing it. There's that air of the unknown and the fear of the unknown. Because what's scarier than what you don't know? To me, that's the scariest thing out there. So that's why I think these movies are so effective to us.
That's right. And the environment then plays a great deal has a lot to do with why it works. That
Hmm.
mansion in The Haunting is just like, oh, you know. And then there are movies that aren't even what you would consider horror movies, but have like Hitchcock's Rebecca.
Hmm.
Um, it's just a crazy romance. But when you get to Mandalay and they're like walking around that house, it's like, uh, God damn, maybe that ghost of Rebecca really is around here somewhere.
Right. Right, and Hitchcock is another one of those guys like Mr. Romero that when he went in to make a film, he gave 150% every time to do everything he could to give you the most memorable film he could possibly give
He
you.
knew
And
exactly what he was doing. Yeah.
right, and
I mean, and
like
yes, I won't deny it. There is a bit of manipulation here, but that's the part of the artistry that we're asked to do. People
mhm,
want to be moved in a certain way. And
right,
so the great art like Hitchcock or Romero or those guys, I mean, I'm not going to take it away from Spielberg or
mhm,
any of these guys. They know how to pull the strings.
right,
The Scorsese, these guys, they know exactly what they're doing.
and it's amazing to go and watch. Even right now, you go back and you watch Alfred Hitchcock's Rope. These
Oh,
movies that
yeah.
had such strong political statements back then that were just hidden inside of a horror movie. Mr. Romero, a lot of the stuff he did was
Yeah.
very, very politically charged, but he kept it on the back burner and he put the horror in the foreground. But you go back and watch Night of the Living Dead now, 1968, there's a lot of social issues that are discussed and brought to the forefront in that movie. And Mr. Romero was one of those guys that was like, I'm going to make this movie. If you don't like it, don't watch it. I know what I have. I know the product I have. I'm proud of the product I have. I'm going to put the best actors on that screen, the best actresses on that screen, and I'm going to give you the best product I have.
Well, it's interesting. And George, uh, I learned this from George, even though I knew it instinctively, but he loved all kinds of movies.
Mhm.
He did not start out to be, I'm going to be the horror director.
Mhm.
I'm going to invent a whole new genre of called zombies. In fact, he
Right.
didn't even call them zombies. He called them ghouls.
Ghouls.
Yeah. And he used to say that my movies aren't about zombies. My movies are about the people and the
Hmm.
effect that this situation is having on them. So, which is why you find Night of the Living Dead has social commentary, why Dawn of the Dead has such an obvious social commentary, why Day of the Dead is then the next level of what happens to society when it crumbles.
Yeah.
And I think any of the good directors want to find the milieu and say something about it.
Yes. Um, and that's something I've always loved. And I think horror's been, a term that I hate is woke. Now you got people saying that horror is woke, and it's like, you know what? Horror has had social cues and social justice and political statements since it started. Horror has always been in the forefront of social issues and things like that. And the internet's just floored it to where it shouldn't be. But
Well, as
like you said,
it does for everything.
you ain't lying there, sir.
Yeah.
So we've talked about a lot. We've talked about how you got started in the genre. We've talked about some of the amazing projects that you've been a part of. But I want to have a little fun here for a second. My little buddy Ghostface is here now, and he has a question for you. What's your favorite scary movie, John? What is your favorite horror movie of all time?
I can't answer that, Ken. I really don't have a singular movie that I will say The Haunting is definitely up there.
Mhm.
I love George's movies, of course, because I worked on them. But in a way, I'm so close to them that I almost can't divorce myself from them in
Sure.
terms of being able to just watch them and enjoy them. I do watch them and enjoy them, but it's a different experience. Um, I think The Exorcist is right up there. I think in terms of craft and story, and just the general idea. In terms of the modern era, it's kind of hard for me to say right now. I'd have to. I mean, there's so many great ones, and I'm a particular fan of Asian horror.
Hmm.
I love the Japanese horror films. Um, uh, it's really hard for me to get pinned down. And I know that's a dodge, but that's my
No,
answer. I'm
it's funny
sticking
because
to
like
it.
I try to give people like a general idea of what we're going to talk about. I never tell anybody I'm going to ask them that question because I don't want them to think about it. I don't want you to
Well,
have time to sit and.
yeah, and I mean, the other thing that I love movies where I can see the director's handiwork, not because it's overwhelming, but I love Wes Craven was a friend of mine, and I loved his work, and obviously he had just an incredible career.
Sure.
I think Nightmare on Elm Street was an incredibly creative movie. The Last House on the Left, when it came out, freaked me out. It was just I went to see that in the theater, and it was kind of like, oh my God, I need a shower.
Yeah,
Um,
Wes, what did you do?
yeah, what did you do to me, man? Um, and he was the kind, he was like, first of all, he was a real intellectual and an academic. He was just the quietest, kindest guy. He made these horrible movies.
Right.
Same with George. George was this big, tall, great guy, the nicest guy you could possibly imagine. But
That's I've always said the horror guys are the nicest guys in the world because, they take their time and like they know they appreciate their fans,
yeah. Oh
and
yeah,
you like
yeah, yeah.
you brought up Wes. Like my wife's favorite movie of all time is the People Under the Stairs.
Oh,
And
that's a really good one. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
feel like that's an extremely underrated Wes Craven film, and
Definitely.
um I completely agree with you. Like every person in the horror genre that Ashley and I have had the pleasure and the privilege of interviewing or meeting or doing meet and greets with, they're so kind and so sweet. And I've never had a horror person look down on us or treat us badly. And that to me is just it really speaks about the character of the people that are involved in the horror genre, in my opinion.
Well, it's all about storytelling.
Hmm.
And I think that those of us who've had some success in that genre, the genre offers us an opportunity to say a lot of things in storytelling. We can talk really we if it's done well, we can fill it with commentary about the world that we live in. We can fill it with great characterizations. All of those things are important. And it's not easy to do. You have to know your craft.
Yeah.
Um, you were talking about Greg Nicotero before. Greg was a kid when he started working with us. He was working with Tom Savini on Day of the Dead, but he learned his. He's running Walking Dead and he's doing the
Hmm.
Creepshow TV series, but he knows how to do it.
Right. And he did a great job. And like you said, The Walking Dead. He really, I mean, he's been on the scene for a very long time, but
Oh
he
yeah.
really exploded with The Walking Dead and his makeup effects throughout that. So, um, John, I've had an amazing time talking to you about everything, getting to know you a little bit better, learning how horror started for you and how special horror is to you. But before I let you go, sir, I always end this with the same question. We're going to bounce back to The Haunting. And what we're going to do is rank that movie on a skull count. Now, we're not going to rank The Haunting on acting, production, score, things like that. What we're going to do is rank The Haunting on how much it affected you on your first viewing. So, 0 skulls being not effective, 5 being extremely effective. You can use half and quarter skulls anywhere in the middle. John, what would your ranking of The Haunting be?
Well, that's easy. It was 5, no doubt.
I
5
mean,
all the way.
I had a feeling it was, but my script said I had to ask. And you know what happens when you go off script.
5
So,
skulls, man. 5 skulls, no
so I
doubt.
do want to say one more time, guys, because we are at the end of the third act. The credits are about to roll and the curtain's about to drop. But before that happens, I do have those social media links in the description, as well as the links to John's book. So make sure you're checking that out. Whichever location you feel comfortable, whether it's Barnes and Noble, Amazon, all of that's in the description. So make sure you're checking that out as well. John, please don't go anywhere. I got a couple more questions for you. Um, Everybody else, as always, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. It really does help the channel more than you know. And follow Sledgehammer Horror on social media. All our links are in the description as well. But until next time, keep talking horror, stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.